enthusiastically support Amendment 186, and I thought that the Noble Baroness Tyler of Enfield really spelt out extremely articulately the importance of banking hubs, and also how that name could often be prosecuted for mis-selling. But actually, even banks themselves, in terms of the service they offer when you actually go into them, few that are still open, can be accused of actually only having the kind of minimum service that is required. I thought it was interesting that, I mean, that heartbreaking story in a way that the Noble Lord Hunt of King's Heath talked about the 91-year-old. But you don't have to be 91 and have a heartbreaking story. Things can just go wrong, like your card can stop working or whatever. And when you try and solve it on your phone and it doesn't work, you then go into the bank and to be honest with you, they treat you as though you're wasting their time, as though you've done something wrong, and so on and so forth. And often can't solve the problem and say, why don't you solve it if you're banking online or you're banking on your phone? It's like, I would have done that if I could have done that, and so on and so forth. I don't think, in other words, it's necessarily a special needs problem, as was just simply referred. I think it can happen to anyone, that sometimes you need human intervention to sort out your banking. But anyway, I'm also interested in supporting those amendments that allow access to cash. The Noble Lord Tunnicliffe's, I think, amendments 180, 181. I especially liked Amendment 189 from Lord Holmes of Richmond, and the attempt at making UK cash infrastructure a critical national infrastructure, and 189A in terms of access to physical banking services. But I suppose what I'm concerned about is that to note that the importance of cash is not just related to those who technically struggle with their phones or with technology. I think sometimes this discussion implies that some of us are just kind of Luddites who can't cope or don't want to embrace the full excitement of new technology or digital futures. And I want to just emphasise that I actually can see the advantages of a cashless society. I mean, mainstream cashless transactions carry certain information about payment participants, what was purchased and when, and that can be a huge barrier to money laundering and tax avoidance. I think that's genuinely important. But also for individuals and as consumers, it can actually mean, and maybe this is slightly different to what others have emphasised, that it can help you with your budgeting because you've got the electronic receipts, you can see what's going in and what's going out. I'm actually rather enthusiastic about those technological steps forward, and I don't in any way want to hold back the march of progress in the way that some have implied. But it's precisely because cashless transactions mean that information about payment participants is available to financial institutions and banks in a different kind of way that it can also give those organisations huge surveillance capability and invasive powers in a way that we maybe have not seen so much in the past. It's not then that you're taking cash out, but that everything has to be recorded, and that means that you are not able to do things that you were able to do with discretion, perhaps. Now, it should be noted, and I don't think it's entirely being paranoid, that in China, financial surveillance is used to censor and restrict the freedom of people to express opinions against the state. And you might think, well, that will never happen in democracy. But in a later amendment that I've got in this bill, when I say later, I mean if it ever arrives, it's 241B, should anyone like to note it, because I don't suppose anyone will be here to listen to it. I was inspired by seriously, about how payment processing in terms of fintech companies like PayPal had in fact, and in a way, the move towards everything being cashless and this cashless society and everything being digitised can and has meant that, for example, PayPal did in fact close down accounts on the basis of politics. And so I don't think I'm just being paranoid. And I also think that there tends to be a bit of a casual assumption that those who want to keep their financial transactions private, that is to use cash from time to time, might be up to something dodgy, as though the only reason why you might want to be free to choose to use cash is either you're kind of involved in embezzlement or tax fraud, or today, actually, it's been much more friendly than that. They just assume that you're technically incompetent and old-fashioned and can't keep up. And I just think that it's something that we have to be a little bit careful about. I've also noticed that there is a trend to judge for financial services, to judge how individuals are what individuals are doing in terms of purchasing decisions and use of money in a way that they might not have done if it weren't quite so detailed. So I was interested recently in the fact that HSBC, which is my bank, kind of were involved in a report that basically condemned people's decisions about how much they spent on gambling and were backing affordability checks. Now, I know that there will be people in this room, I can already see some of them, who I disagree with on gambling. I think it's a legal leisure activity. You should be able to do what you want. I'm not, but the idea that the bank is saying, we have customers who spend too much on gambling, i.e. too much on a perfectly legal leisure activity, and we can see this, and then they give the breakdown, would indicate that rather than being a dispassionate financial service, they're actually getting involved in things in a way that they maybe shouldn't. And I'm just waiting for my bank to send me I've never gambled, by the way, but they could well send me a note about how much I'm spending in TK Maxx and saying it's all gone a bit mad, right? And, what I'm suggesting is that when we had cash, we took the money out and we spent it on what we wanted and nobody could see. A cashless society creates a slightly different point. So I think that Amendment 186 on accessibility, 184 on levels of cash acceptance, the whole issues around digital exclusion and financial inclusion are very important, but I don't think they quite capture some of the broader political trends associated with this issue. And I'm also very sympathetic to the noble Baroness Noakes's notion that on the one hand, cash is not a human right, and I don't want to get stuck on that. I also am never keen on regulations lasting forever, and I think a sunset clause and time limited is a good idea. But I'm just anxious that we don't forget the political trends that surround this issue and not simply treat it as a technical issue.